Greg, how are you? Welcome to Endurance Minded.
Yeah, Taylor, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Super excited to have you on the show. Your expertise is 100% in alignment with why Endurance Minded exists, and the things that are near and dear to my heart in terms of mental performance and helping athletes excel in all areas of their athleticism, not just or over and above their physical performance. And we know that so much of that
Mhm.
physical performance is tied into and linked to the mental performance. And so I can't wait to dive in and get to get down into the to the thick of some of these concepts that I'm passionate about, and you're an expert on. So I can't wait. But yeah, before we dive in, maybe take us back to your youth and how you built yourself to where you're at now.
Oh, wow, that's a big open-ended question. I could take an hour just on that, but you would turn into my therapist on that, I think. Um, yeah, I grew up an only child. My dad worked away 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and so a lot of times it was just my mom and I. And then my parents got divorced, so essentially I was only child, raised by a single mom, and I kind of raised myself in a way. There's an old school term called latchkey kid, and that's the kid that had the key, the lock to the key, or the key to the lock of home around their neck. And I let myself in after school, and mom wasn't home till 8 because she was kind of working 3 jobs. So there's a degree to which I kind of raised myself. And there was a time when that was maybe a bit wayward, but I found sport, and it was this huge identity structure component that it gave me to make meaning out of my life. And I had a few amazing mentors along the way as coaches who kind of really believed in me. And even though I wasn't the best athlete on the pitch or on the basketball court, I realized pretty quickly that if I worked harder than everyone else, I could do some pretty cool things. And I always tend to make the team and be a starter and have some successes with it. And so I guess later I was able to apply that to life in other ways, whether it's going back to school and to do what I do now, or raising kids, that kind of stuff. But my whole identity as a youth, as an athlete, was such a prominent foundational thing. And I'm so glad I had that, because my identity as a sort of a smart kid was pretty low. My self-worth as a sort of smart kid was pretty low. And so, as a young adult, if you were to ask me if you thought I would ever have a master's degree now in a private counseling practice, I would have laughed. But again, these mentors kind of helped me see that I was smart, and that I just needed to care about what I was learning. And some point along the way, I volunteered at a camp. Happened to be a camp for kids with cancer. And it was just an incredible experience, because I learned quite quickly about gratitude for life, and about creating experiences that were purposeful and meaningful. And those kids taught me a lot. And I ended up being with that camp for about 7 years, which was quite an indelible experience for me. Yeah, at some point along the way, I graduated with an undergrad, and that was not an easy road for me. I had gotten kicked out of a university due to academic probation. I didn't have any family finances to fall back on, so I had to go get a bunch of jobs and um, make my way back to school. And it took me about 7 years to get an undergrad. And then I moved to Whistler, BC, up here in Canada. And it was just a playground for athletics. And so I started working in ski shops and found mountain biking and mountain bike racing. And at some point along the way, thankfully, this identity structure changed. This idea of who I was changed. And so the idea of going back to school for a master's degree came up, and I managed to get a scholarship to do that, which was unbelievable. And yeah, as a result, I've been in Whistler for the last 27 years and had this private counseling practice going for 17 years. And the bulk of that time also working with doing mental performance consulting with a bunch of high level athletes up here.
Cool. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I love I mean, everybody loves a good underdog story, but I think there's so much value in I think just hearing it from anybody that we can, someone like yourself who is in a place that where you're doing something that you love, and you've built a career around something that you're passionate
Mhm.
about, and it doesn't, you don't have to be in that place. I think we get so fixated on who we're supposed to be, quote unquote, or these
Mhm.
identities wrapped around that maybe they're placed on us, or we feel that we should be a certain person, and whether it's in athletics
Mhm.
or our career, or academically or whatever. And I yeah, I always, maybe part of it's kind of the human condition, right? We always want to be somewhere that we're not, right? A lot of times, right? We want to like
Mhm.
rush to that next step.
Mhm.
We want to accelerate the process. We want to, we all want it to. And I mean, kudos to you
Totally.
for sticking with it. It's such a great
Yeah.
story, and such a good reminder that
Oh,
you
thanks.
can
I work
always
with,
create that story.
yeah, I do work with lots of young adults now, and I always remind them to follow their heart.
Mm,
Follow your heart. And because not everyone knows exactly what they want to be in life, right? And so you just got to follow your heart, because I think the journey, life kind of unfolds before us on the journey.
right. Yeah.
Hmm.
You had mentioned kind of the work ethic associated with sport. And I mean, do you feel like there's the discipline required for athletics, it has some crossover, or helped you show up in a way that was necessary in other areas of your life?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I think as a young learner, elementary school, high school, even early university, um, I wasn't super motivated that way. I was really motivated with sports. I got a lot of, and socially, I think I was a well liked kid. So I liked to be at school because all my friends were there and the sports were there. Excuse me, but it wasn't a particularly a time where I was particularly motivated with the academic side of things. But because again, I mean, and we could dig into this if you want, but I don't want to take too much time away from the podcast. Other people had projected an identity onto me that Greg wasn't smart. So by the
Mm,
time I got to, grade 11, grade 12, early university, well, couldn't even really get into university. I had to go to like a JUCO, I guess you call it down there,
right.
because my grades weren't good enough. And um, but it wasn't until later that I realized that, wait a minute, I decide my identity. Other people can project things onto me all they want, but I get to decide,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that work ethic piece, well, I guess I remember two coaches. One was a coach who was a particular hard ass. And if you were the hardworking kid, I realized quite quick that he was less of a hard ass. So I just worked my butt off because I didn't want the guy yelling at me. But I also noticed when that happened, I would be a starter. And this was in box lacrosse, and a great sport, real fast sport, lots of skill involved. And if I was working harder than everyone else, I was a starter. And then somehow I applied that to basketball. And same thing happened. I was not the most talented kid out there, but boy, did it take me a long way. I played for some provincial teams, managed to get a minor scholarship, and had a lot of fun with basketball, and have met some lifelong friends that have stuck with me. We've stuck with each other ever since. I guess it was later when I realized that I was smart in the classic sense of the word. I just had to really care about what I was learning, and also, lo and behold, go figure, I had to really invest some work into it.
Right.
And again, there were some very important mentors along the way that kind of convinced me that I could do that. And so when I actually put the effort in to school work, similar to what I would do with sport, my grades just did very, very well. And and obviously I found a master's degree program and excelled in that. It was terrific.
Yeah.
Um,
I,
yeah.
I love the piece about, being, you have to be excited or you have to be passionate about what you're pursuing. I think
Hmm.
I see that with athletes as well, where so many people are kind of told or assume that they should pursue a certain discipline or be a certain type of
Hmm.
athlete, right? Like I think it happens a lot with running, right? Because it's the barrier to entry there is relatively low, and so
Hmm.
a lot of new athletes assume that's what they should do if they want to work towards building some sort of fitness or increase their endurance or whatever. And
Hmm.
so like you don't have to like that. Find what you like first, right? Find what you want to engage in, and
Hmm.
then it is much less painful. It comes
Totally.
maybe not
Hmm.
naturally, but certainly you're excited to put that work in. And
Hmm.
that goes a long way. And so that's great. I see so many parallels there.
Hmm.
Like once you found what
Hmm.
you're excited about, that identity shift immediately, right? You're or not, I know it wasn't overnight in real time,
Totally.
but you're like, oh, that's actually
Hmm.
not who I am. I just didn't care about these other things. I just didn't care about the
Yeah.
subject matter.
And the moment I did, like the world unfolds before you, right?
Right, right.
And yeah, so finding joy in what you do, having fun, connecting with the people that are alongside you. I think connecting with the environment,
Hmm.
because where we're running is kind of special, right?
Right.
Because when you connect with the environment that way, and the people that are out there, all of a sudden you've got hope. I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I mean, I love the language around that too. I think language is such an important piece of how we pursue our athletic goals. And the narrative
Hmm.
that we use and the words we use within that narrative to describe that athletic journey. If it's
Hmm.
like it gets
Hmm.
popularized to grind and suffer and those are kind of hype
Hmm.
buzzwords that people like to think is part, and I know it's sexy and it can be fun to grind out a workout. I mean, I like hard workouts as much as the next person, but it's just like not day in and day out, right?
Hmm.
Like we have to come back to joy and what makes you happy. What's going to
Hmm.
be an
Hmm.
exciting thing to engage in when we have the
Hmm.
opportunity, to be
Hmm.
athletes, right? It's not a chore, right? We get the
Hmm.
we get the chance, we get the opportunity.
Hmm.
But that language piece, I
Yeah, and
go ahead.
well, I was just going to say that takes me back to a particular sufferfest moment I was having after I did one of these Grand Fondo races, and up here in Canada. And I like to think I'm a strong age grouper, and so what do? Line up at the front of the pack. And did I totally deserve to be there? Probably not, if I'm really honest with myself on this particular fall day. But I managed to stay with the pack for about 100 kilometers. There's 20K left, and I bonk something huge. I'm turning squares on the bike, and everyone's passing me, and I mean everyone. And I got nothing left, and my mood just plummeted. And I realized quite quickly that I was really attached to the outcome goal of arriving with this lead group. I beat myself up about it as if my identity, my self-worth, was attached to that outcome. But quite quickly I was able to shift the narrative. So again, really paying attention to the language we create around these predicaments. I was able to shift my language towards gratitude that I have this body that's capable of riding 120 kilometers in the first place. Super beautiful place that we were riding between Vancouver and Whistler. It's like incredible country. And just the gratefulness of being able to accomplish such a feat. Outcome be damned, right? And as soon as that happened, my mood kind of came back, my optimism kind of came back. Yeah, I limped into the finish line, but a burger and a beer tastes pretty good. And then my mood came back in due time. So yeah, the language we create around our experiences has a huge impact on how we feel psychologically, right?
Yeah.
So literally, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're probably right.
Yeah. I love that quote. Yeah. I've heard that before. And I, yeah, I mean, I think so much of it again is obviously like the mental attitude, and it's what we carry into, um,
Hmm.
down to like an individual workout or session, right? Like that. And I've always said,
Totally.
like, I tell my athletes, and I like, give yourself the opportunity to excel, like show up, and
Hmm.
certainly some
Hmm.
days are not the days, um,
Hmm.
but um, but there could be a chance where you actually, where you shine through. Um, and
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think I just love that idea of like, yeah, have some gratitude for showing up and give yourself a chance, and
Hmm.
see what happens. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that intentionality right down to the workout, or even right down to the rep in the gym. Jim Taylor, a well recognized sports psychologist down there in the US, he talks about creating narrative intentionality before every time you step up to the squat rack,
Yeah.
right? This is going to make an investment into who I am next,
Hmm.
right? And just being really deliberate as you approach the bench, right? And so, yeah, we can take this down right to very small technical skills that we're working with every day.
Yeah. So I want to elaborate,
Mm-hmm.
or I want you to carry us a little further into this language piece, because we were talking about kind of like the grind and the hustle and some of this, harder language that is, can put a lot of pressure on athletes. And I know one of the areas that you've talked about is the evolution of language, and specifically, from mental toughness to mental
Mm-hmm.
resilience. And even in that
Mm-hmm.
kind of, there's a dichotomy in the language there, right? Toughness is very much, I feel, like in alignment with some of these, this harsher language we were talking about, and resilience has a different connotation.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that? Why is that shift in language important, and what does that mean for athletes?
Yeah, great question. I think high level, super overarching for me, and very broad person to person, I'm really interested in people's mental health. And I'm really interested in sport and optimal performance states and success, with outcomes. But at a meta level, I'm really interested in athletes' mental health. And so I think there's an evolution in language. And I think in the old days, the idea of just being tough and mentally tough, I think this perhaps has harmed some athletes. And if you think of like a men's health issue, perhaps broadly, this idea that we're born into a society that we're supposed to have this coat of arms and the shield of armor, and we're not supposed to feel things, like that's not healthy for us men, right? And so sometimes working with athletes around mental toughness in the olden days, if you will, um, that maybe took away from optimal performance states for athletes because they were burning out, or they were feeling things, and they could have been mental health things that they weren't sharing. And so that's not okay, I think, for the broad arc, the broad trajectory of people's wellness. And so, yeah, I think it's okay that language evolves. And so I personally am trying to really work with this concept of resilience as opposed to toughness, because, yeah, resilient athletes are able to persist and persevere through chaos, which sport brings us, endurance training brings us, events bring us. And sort of the chaos that's involved in all that stuff has some very um, important character traits. One of those character traits is this idea that we have some rise to greatness, some plateau where the greatness is enjoyed, but then a very expected downfall, an expected crash burn, whether that's literal, like we die, right? Or it's figurative, like I bonked in the race, or a leaf fell off the tree. There's this crash and burn, and those things are expected. Athletes that see those events as expected, I think, are more resilient. Athletes who see those events as kind of the world conspiring against them, and why did the race organizers do this to me? That's sort of like a powerless, I think, response to chaos. Versus if we acknowledge that chaos is expected, it makes it easier for us to orient to the next part of chaos theory, which is rebirth, renewal, new beginnings. And that's what resiliency is all about, right? Is orienting people to this renewal, whether it's in a race after you've had a bonk fest, or whether it's in with your mental health, right? Where's the new beginning?
What the kind of, I mean, to stay on the language theme, the word that comes to mind for me is vulnerability, and it seems like toughness attempts to kind of remove that vulnerability, and resiliency has it in there. But what role does vulnerability play for athletes? I mean, how do they incorporate that?
Yeah, great question. I think vulnerability normalizes chaos.
Hmm.
If we're trying to be tough through it, it takes away from our ability to normalize it. So when it happens to us, we go into denial. That's not a healthy state. Vulnerability is kind of where the magic happens, right? And of course, we know this now thanks to the work of Brene Brown, who's done some amazing work out there in this realm. And I like how she talks about vulnerability, because when she first did her research on that, she realized I don't like this vulnerability stuff, because she's like, it's tough Texan or something, right?
Right.
And so that resonates for me, because no one likes being vulnerable, right? But it truly is when we turn toward that vulnerability, and when we truly acknowledge what's real for us, when the growth and the healing and the magic starts to happen. I think a lot of the language that we use about where we're at is quite unconscious, perhaps, and maybe informed by past experience, whether it's, in my case, people projecting our identities onto us. So that might influence my language. I'm not smart in traditional school sense, right? And so I think we have to try to work to raise our level of awareness of where these sort of where are the seeds of these dysfunctional, irrational language that we come up with about ourselves. Where do they come from, perhaps a little bit? And I don't mean where do they come from like in a Freudian sense. Like sports psychology and mental performance consulting is not about digging into the past like that, but it's just about raising your level of awareness of when those negative narratives are triggered, so that we can manipulate them a little bit. We can change them. We can be really deliberate about them. So I have 3 or 4 bullet point narratives that I prime athletes with for competition day. One of them is, or I'll tell you all of them, it's I've done the work. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I believe in my capabilities. Now let's go tear this track a new one, right?
Right.
I've done the work. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Now let's have some fun and tear this track a new one. The fun part is important for me because I think when we're having fun doing what we're doing, I think it's easier for us to enter a flow state, right? So yeah, just to go back to that language piece a little bit, I've done the work. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Let's have some fun, tear this course a new one.
Yeah. I mean, it really seems like, it's challenging because there is a juxtaposition there in the sense that,
Mm-hmm.
Athletes of any kind there
Mm-hmm.
is a toughness there, right? There is like a grittiness, you
Yeah.
embrace discomfort, and you at certain times you have to shut down certain parts of, what your brain's telling you or what your body's telling you, right? So you can
Yeah.
push forward, of course, in a way that's safe. But that really flat is kind of butts up against vulnerability. That's how do we balance those things? When do we inject vulnerability and resilience with that real need
Mm-hmm.
to push sometimes and to be tough, or however you
Mm-hmm.
want to
Yeah.
class. Again,
Yeah.
there's a language piece there. There's some nuance, but yeah,
Yeah.
what's that? How do we find that sweet spot, or when do we know when to do that?
Great question, and I love peeling back these layers. Of course, there's no easy answers. I think maybe you look at mental toughness in two ways. Maybe there's a capital T toughness where I'm working through injuries that I shouldn't be, right?
Mm,
You know what I mean? And then there's small T toughness when, yeah, that's grit. That's like putting up with physical pain, to get stronger. Um, and so maybe that's a way to split hairs a bit on that. But I do get the juxtaposition and the duality that's created with wordsmithing like this, because it does create some confusion. My beef, I guess you might call it, is when the idea of mental toughness gets in the way of our mental health. I firmly believe that sometimes we got to dig deep on the course, and we got to be tough. We got to put behind us mental, physical, emotional pain to get through a workout. But we also have to do that wisely. Another way to think of this, like from training to prevent injury perspective, might be there's good pain and then there's bad pain. And if we're in that good pain realm, well, let's work through it, because we know we're investing in our, in our process here. But if there's bad pain going on in our knee, in our back, wherever, in our Achilles tendon, plantar fasciitis, then we gotta hold off. So yeah, maybe think of it like that. There's good mental toughness, and then there's bad mental toughness,
yeah,
right? And that sort of filter of, is this idea of being mentally tough getting in the way of my mental health? Then maybe that's not so good.
yeah, yeah. I love that. Just that the idea of like the little t versus kind of the capital T. I think that really resonates
Mm-hmm.
with me. And I can see
Mm-hmm.
clearly that because we've all been there, like that. I know that there's even times, as much as it's a very like practice what you preach type of thing, where as much as I understand and realize what I need to do, sometimes I still, have trouble being vulnerable or sitting out when I know I need to
Mm-hmm.
sit out, right? And it's very much that like big T type of toughness that I know, and now
Mm-hmm.
I can catch myself, but even then I'm like, like I went down that path.
Yeah.
I spent a little bit too much time trying to go down that path, trying to force it, and as a coach, I
Yeah.
work to try to help athletes catch that too, right? Like cut them off at the pass, so
Mm-hmm.
to speak. So I love that's a
Mm-hmm.
very easy, like I love that moniker. That really resonates with me.
And another way to look at it too is with some like trauma language. There's capital T trauma, right? We want to avoid that. Then there's small t trauma that you could argue in a child development context. We want our kids exposed to some gentle versions of what we might call tough stuff, because it helps them build the ability to adapt and learn and maybe avoid that in the future, obviously without getting profoundly injured or hurt, right? And so there's a degree to which the small t trauma actually really helps us build resiliency over time, because we get exposure to tough stuff and we realize that we become empowered knowing that we can get through it, right? So
Yeah,
same thing with working out, like in endurance training, is we're actually kind of looking for some small t toughness in there, because we got to learn how to get through some tough stuff, because we're about to run a 100 miler.
right. Yeah, that I mean, that perfectly encapsulates kind of that duality that I was thinking about. It's like,
Juxtaposition, yeah.
it's like, there's going to be
Mm-hmm.
some tough days, and you need some toughness, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's why you're
Mm-hmm.
training consistently. You're looking for
Mm-hmm.
small bouts of exposure to build that resiliency, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that eventually, but yeah, too
Mm-hmm.
far, and that capital T toughness is what yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So and just to add one thing is those small bouts of small T toughness um, give the nervous system a sense of empowerment, knowing that we overcame it, and then we can use that to build on to take on something a little bit bigger of a T toughness,
Right.
and so on and so on and so on until we can do some really hard stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that definition of tough, small t, changes as we build resiliency, right? Like, I mean, what
Mm-hmm.
was hard today, if you stay consistent 6 months from now, won't be hard,
Mm-hmm.
or will feel different.
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
that tough changes over time. And so I love it. And that's the brilliance. Like, that's what, obviously, like, that's the adaptive components that are so fascinating from an athletic perspective. Is, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like, with consistency, that perspective changes, right? What felt hard
Exactly.
today is not hard next year, if you stick with it.
Exactly.
um, you
Exactly.
you mentioned the
Precisely.
nervous system, though, and I know that you've worked a lot on the importance of regulating the nervous system. And I because it feels like there's a component there, right? Like, we can talk about resiliency, toughness, but there is a very real system at play here that is regulating,
Mm-hmm.
how we move through these experiences, how we process them, and so on and so forth. So yeah, what is the importance of that? How do we, how do we leverage that knowledge and these systems to help us be in a place that's more productive?
Yeah, there's lots we could talk about there. I think high level, our nervous systems are designed to take on small bouts of stress and then have long periods of rest. But the way our society, works in this place and space and time is that we put up with long periods of stress and have really small periods of rest. That's a little, backwards, if you will. So I think globally speaking, we need to be really deliberate in the society we live in to give ourselves permission to rest, right? To really rest and digest and recharge, so that when the stressful events come up, we're energized to deal with it. Now, when you think of the context of race day or the rigors of training, I think there's a real relationship in the nervous system for athletes between having a settled nervous system. And a settled nervous system might be one that's able to enter this physiological state known as sort of like relaxed alertness. So we're relaxed enough that we can rest and digest and sleep and procreate and all those things. But we're also um, alert enough that we could deal with something if it came up, right? This is a healthy nervous system state. So that settled nervous system. And so I think the athlete learning to, settle the nervous system at appropriate times, either pre-competition or during competition, could use a lot of amazing research strategies, from mindfulness to cognitive behavioral strategies to actually get that settled nervous system state. Now, on competition day, that has to be sort of uh, done in a way that also gets us activated. So the activated nervous system, when we're ready to kind of hit when the race gun goes off, right? So we got to be able to get into that settled nervous system, yet at the same time activate the nervous system on demand. and sort of mentally resilient athletes can do that on demand. And so lots of strategies we can work with athletes to either settle the nervous system or to activate the nervous system. Now, just as back to that relaxed alertness state, there's a other side of the spectrum of relaxed alertness within the nervous system might be like hyper vigilant, like kind of tweaked, freaking out about every single thing going on, everything with the diet, every twinge in the body, the weather, the delay on the course, and all those things. When the nervous system gets all hypervigilant around that sort of stuff, what it does is it opens the door to our distorting reality, right? And having irrational beliefs about what's happening. So those are moments when we can recognize that that's happening in the nervous system. We can go back to some strategies to settle that nervous system down so that we can get back to kind of focusing on what's in our control. So this is just one little example of how I might work with athletes on learning how to regulate their nervous system. And I think there's great benefits to this on race day, but also in everyday life when you're having that conversation with your partner about the household economy or how we raise kids or those other stressful things in life. We can regulate our nervous system so we can actually get through the conversation wisely without slamming cupboards.
Right. Yeah. that's a, and I mean, that's a great, I have so often on this podcast and elsewhere made the, not necessarily argument, but just observation, I guess, that there are such direct corollaries between, how we approach our athleticism and how that shows up or how that enables us to show up in other areas of our lives. And I mean, that's just a great example. Is, yes, we can work on these things as it relates to our race day strategy or how we come into hard workouts or consistency or, any of these areas. But in that, we're also able to better regulate ourselves across the board, be more mindful, be more present. And I just think that's always a good reminder, as athletes, we can be guilty of putting our athletic pursuits in one box and then everything else is in another box, right? We're like, well, training's over here. My goals as athletes are over here. And that doesn't impact the other, 23 hours a day, as I'd refer to it. But in fact, of course it does, right? Nothing is in a vacuum. And yeah, I'm always searching for those opportunities to pull from my athletic identity and my pursuit of my athletic goals, ways to leverage those skills in other areas of my life, and I see it play out for athletes who are really, you have to invest in it. You have to be willing to make those connections and see it kind of realized. But yeah, I mean, I again, just
And Taylor, I should mention like some of the more researched side of strategies that are designed to settle that nervous system down. Things like visualization, right? Imagery, narrative, creating that narrative of yourself succeeding at what you're doing. Focus type exercises, juggling, other cognitive behavioral type exercises like tuning into sensory awareness, right? Because it's the senses that tell us what's real, and what's real is you're safe and you're worthy of love and belonging. And as soon as the nervous system feels that, it can settle. The other one would be breath work, right? Utilizing breathing strategies to lower your heart rate will also have big impacts on where you're hanging out in your brain state. Right. Because you don't like, all the irrational thinking tends to happen in the front part of the brain. When we do belly breathing, our brainwave energy moves to the back part of the brain, which is when we're kind of in that relaxed alertness place, as opposed to the hypervigilant, right?
Right.
So those are some of the strategies that I might recommend people look into.
Yeah, I have I've really become interested in the breath work piece. I have just I've been a little late to the game. I've known that it is valuable, and I have had um, on and off through my athletic career, and through my life. I've done yoga consistently where breath work was a part of that. But I've since recently kind of retuned in to bouts of that strategically throughout the day to just help kind of recenter, refocus, deal with work stress, deal with training load, deal with
Mm-hmm.
sleep. And
Mm-hmm.
that, I mean, what's is that an effective strategy? Or is it like do it a couple times a day? Is it do it before a race? Is it I don't, because I'm just kind of
Mm-hmm.
starting on that journey for myself to
Yeah.
think about doing it consistently. And I just
Mm-hmm.
curious what you're, in terms of implementation,
Mm-hmm.
what's that look like on your end?
Yeah, if you think of, and of course, there's all kinds of different people out there in the marketplace,
Hmm.
slinging their opinion on that, and they're talking about some neat ideas that you can do with it. Wim Hof is one of them, right? Like these cold plunges and really using breath to distract the brain from the pain of the body's feeling in the cold and the urge to jump out of the icy lake, right? Is using the breath to distract the brain. But let me back up and talk about mindfulness for a sec. Mindfulness is kind of the ability to notice what's happening in your brain without getting carried away by it. The ability to notice what's happening without getting carried away by it. Because if we don't take a minute to notice and just be the witness observer to something, we tend to get carried away by it, us humans. And so breath work is a great tool that we could be using moment by moment throughout our day, um, to create a buffer between the stimulus, whatever's happening to us, and how we respond. And I was saying this to you the other day in the workshop. If you look at any sport, doesn't matter if it's a basketball player on the free throw line, a tennis player on the back straight doing their little bouncy bounce routine, football player about to take a snap, high jumper getting ready to, do their footwork to do a high jump, endurance athlete at a nutrition tent. I could go on and on and on. Every single one of these athletes, as a refocusing technique after that sort of match play, they use breath work to settle their nervous system. And by doing that, you're able to create a buffer between the stimulus. Holy crap, I'm shooting the last second shot here, and the other team's fans are behind the hoop freaking out, creating a distraction for me. I'm able to create a buffer between all the stimulus, and how I'm going to react to it. So it's just you, the ball, and the hoop in this case, right? So breath work is quite magical that way because it's an amazing mindful tool that we can use, to not get carried away by the predicament. And then we keep our brain power, we keep our wisdom. And the alternative to that is, now we're kind of a headless horseman, I call it, right? Now we're really affected by what's happening to us and we're kind of maybe having a tantrum, right? So, as a brief sort of maybe takeaway from the podcast, back to your question, I would suggest a brief breathing exercise when you wake up to help you set a narrative intention for the day, right? So this might be 1 to 3 minutes where you sit up in your bed or on the floor, and simply put, belly breathing, 4 or 5 seconds in, 4 or 5 seconds out. 4 or 5 seconds in, 4 or 5 seconds out. Just doing that a few breaths, Taylor, lowers the heart rate. just doing that. And I'll do that with clients in my office here. And like in a few breaths, all of a sudden they're yawning and apologizing because they don't want to appear that they're distracted or falling asleep in my chair. And I'm like, no, it's great you're yawning, because it's actually your nervous system showing me that you're entering this relaxed alertness place. And that's where you're malleable, you know. So I would start with a brief, and by brief, I mean like 1 to 5 minutes breathing exercise. First thing when you wake up, 4 or 5 seconds in, 4 or 5 seconds out, set the intention for the day. And I believe sort of mood follows action. So when you get busy with the action of the day, whatever that might be, work, family, exercise, I think the narrative you create and the resulting mood that you create is self-explanatory, right? Then you may take a look at moment by moment throughout the day where stressors get you. And how does your nervous system tell you you're stressed? It's in the body, right? Most people feel their stress and tension in their sort of neck, traps, jaws clenched, toes are rolled over. This is something that I really watch for with clients that I work with. Are they sitting in my chair in my office unconsciously with their toes all gripped, right? If you notice those things happening physiologically in the body, those might be great moments to actually ground and find your breath. The last example I'll give you, maybe nighttime, for those people who maybe have trouble falling asleep, or you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't get back to sleep. Also a great time to get back to your breath. 4 or 5 seconds in, 4 or 5 seconds out. There's some other variations out there you could look into. Square breathing is one of them. Neat exercise where you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold the breath in for 4 seconds. Breathe out 4 seconds, hold the breath out for 4 seconds, and continue that for a minute or so. And then, of course, humans tend to be really bad at this mindfulness stuff. So there's some great tools out there, because one might, be benefited by like a guided breathing meditation. So you can find this on the Calm app, or the one I really like is called Waking Up by Sam Harris. So those are some examples of how you might utilize it. Again, when you're thinking of using breath in the brief moment, it's because we need a refocusing technique so we don't yell at our kid, or so that we don't go running after the person that cut us off road rage style, or so that we can hit that basketball shot, or so that we can collect our thoughts and know how we're going to get through the next 10 kilometers of the endurance race.
Yeah. I've found that it can be valuable as a tool, like before a workout, during like a brief warm-up session, because I think myself, and I think a lot of other people, most people, right, you're running from thing to thing, and oftentimes you're coming in pretty hot to a workout, right? Like it's after work and you got an hour and you got to pick your kids up, or you got to be home, or you want to be home for dinner. We all have these things we're juggling, and as best we try to really, carve out that time. I mean, it's still a lot of times pressure on both ends of that time that we make for ourselves. And that shift in energy is profound, and just like you said, a short, very quick, just to be present of the energy that you're coming in with. You're like, oh yeah, I am coming in hot. I just got out of a meeting. I'm running literally to my, to the gym. I got, I just was in traffic, right? All the things that we were juggling. And yeah, I mean, I've just taken to, like, during my warm up, if it's just some activation, mobility, I usually take a few minutes, or I always take a few minutes. Just that breathwork integration there, it totally changes the mood and the mindfulness. And you don't feel so stressed. You feel I've found that I felt much more present, and I can check in with my body, and I can kind of helps me feel prepared. And I'm not running hot when I start the workout, right? My heart rate's not elevated from a very like tactical perspective. you can build into that effort versus like I'm coming in at 120 BPM, right? Because I'm firing at all cylinders and not I'm already wasting energy. So I don't know. Is that a good time to implement that? I guess I don't want to give bad advice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that would be a great time to implement it because, again, the breath work at the beginning of the exercise or even before you step up to the squat rack
right,
is encouraging you to be really deliberate and purposeful about the exercise hour or the lift you're about to do. So for instance, on the technical side of things, if you are that headless horseman, you just rock up to the squat deck and start busting off unconscious squats. This is how injuries happen, right? If you're coming back from an injury, you might go up to that squat rack really deliberately and purposefully aware with maybe some imagery around how you want your body to be formed and shaped in that exercise so you keep your integrity. And I think that breath work that you might do before each exercise even might really inform that outcome a little bit more deliberately and purposefully.
Yeah. It's amazing how much, and I found this, I know it's present across all disciplines, but I've seen it show up more starkly in strength training with attempting to do maximal compound movements, deadlift, squat, things like that. That mind-body connection is critical. Where I've had personally, and I've seen it happen with athletes, where if you lose it, it's a do or a don't situation, right? I do get the lift, right? I do lift the weight or whatever, or I don't at all, and so that just furthers in those moments. It's really helped me realize like, oh man, this mindfulness is super important. Like if I'm not connected and I don't take that time, like you said, I just walk up, or if I have a lapse in that mindfulness, if I can't stay connected, if I'm thinking about 20 other things and I'm trying to multitask in my mind, it's the difference between success and failure, which is as a student of the sport, when that's happened to me, it's been, devastating and also one of the most exciting things is I'm like, holy shit, this is incredible. I can't believe how important that mental place is, and I think, and it doesn't have to be, it's the same thing on race day, right? Like you have to really be in that space where you can execute, right? Because it's so easy to get distracted, so easy for that narrative to run away from you.
Totally.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think competition. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, all you, fire away.
No, I was just going to say, I think that there's also a distinction between like just doing this stuff on the daily and, what we're going to do on race day and how we can, come up with really deliberate exercises or deliberate narratives that are relevant to race day.
Yeah.
Right? Which is also another little element.
Right.
Yeah.
I know you work with athletes and individuals to help them find their why, and I've talked about the why, the kind of, I guess, proverbial a lot on this show, but I mean, I can't help but feel like there's a connection there between that mindfulness. Like if you are connected to your why, if you know what that is and you're confident in it, you believe it, that's going to allow you that presence and that mindfulness. And so, but like, if we back up, I mean, what's that why? How do athletes get to that place? Because I feel like so often, we're still kind of running around lost, right? We signed up for the race because a buddy's doing it, or we jumped on the bike because our friend had a bike and our neighbor, and we, and that's fine. Like that could be a great gateway, but that's a fleeting, that doesn't keep you in it, right? That's not sustainable. It doesn't build longevity. And so, yeah, if we back up to some of these more foundational components, what are some, how do we get there? How do we find that why for ourselves?
Great question. It's a really high level question that I think all athletes who are wanting to invest in, like a coaching program or signing up for a race need to consider this question. What is my why? Why am I doing this? Why am I getting up at 5:30 in the morning and busting out an hour and a half workout before I got to feed kids and go to work? And so what's my why? And so, for anyone listening, this is something to really consider and think about. You may not have considered it before because you're just doing the race because your buddy signed you up for it. Um, and you got this old bike and you're going to give it a go, right? And your why might be because I want to reconnect with my buddy, right? And if that's the case, great. But I think all athletes really need to kind of consider what's my why. And talking with you a little bit, Taylor, in the past, I mean, you had this you shared your why, which was what is my body capable of? Great question. And so, and I love that way that's posed to that question, because there's kind of no end to it. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And so the why, yeah, you just keep going. And that's very in keeping with who you are and your brand and what you're trying to do at TEC there, right? So it's a great why to have. And I think mine was kind of similar. I kind of shared when I was in the competitive zone, my why was more like I have this body. I've got this gratitude for this body that I have that allows me to do this. And so if I have this ability to do this, I wanted to prove myself deserving of it in a way. And so that was my why. And I think I shared with you that quote came from a sort of famous Canadian named Terry Fox. And I won't take our time away from telling you all who he was, but very, very famous Canadian who is kind of motivates a nation, even though he passed away many decades ago now. But yeah, he had this mindset of, I wanted to prove myself deserving of this life, and that was always my why. But I think we can also weave in our why to our mindfulness, right? Because it can influence our narratives. It can influence our visualization. It can influence our deliberateness and purposefulness of a workout. And so that's why it's important to really know your why, because you can, it can kind of really, weave into all parts of your training. I think I'm in a different stage of life now with kids. And I think one of my whys now, even as an old citizen type athlete, is sort of, I think kids kind of follow, your actions a bit more than your words. And so I want to show my kid that these pursuits that we do give life purpose and meaning, right? And a community. And those are two like anchoring things that give us hope in life, right? Community and purpose and meaning. And so that's my why now, is to kind of indoctrinate my kid into the sort of the joy of moving your body in nature.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I just, I think, I've often said, if I have no other, kind of purpose with my chosen career path, it's to help as many people as I can tap into their why, because it when you do that, if you do that, it's such a grounding force, and again, I think hopefully you can, my hope, because I believe in the power of athleticism and exploring your body's capabilities, hopefully that why allows you to, like you were saying, and like mine, it's never ending, right? You're like, oh, this is, I do this, and there's actually, this is going to carry me for the rest of my life. I'm going to be able to come back to this why in a way that I can engage physically with myself and the world. And and even if you're not out there pushing yourself beyond the limits, right? Just having a physical practice where you are connected to that why, and there's some greater kind of good there, that brings you joy and brings you some presence and mindfulness. And so, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is
Well, you're doing it, man, and that's a core vision or anchoring part of TEC. So well done.
yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. Well, it comes from fantastic conversations with people like yourself that keep my
Hmm.
passion fueled. So thanks for everything you're doing, and that seems that's a beautiful high point to end on. So I think we'll sign off there.
That sounds good, Taylor. Really appreciate the opportunity and thanks for these in-depth questions.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it.